I'm sure you can think of a time where you were reactive, you got triggered, and it came back to harm you. I think a good example of this is in relationships. Maybe there was a time where you snapped at a loved one and it just kind of came back to bite you in the ass. Or maybe there was a time where maybe at work you were getting frustrated towards something and then it caused you to kind of miss out on some details. Or maybe in your home, I think maybe with technology, this can be a good example. Something breaks, something is acting slow, so you start to get frustrated and you're just kind of there generating unnecessary suffering. So I want you to notice how in a lot of those moments, you're not actually very grounded in experience. You're not actually very present with experience. Doesn't mean that frustration is bad. What this means is that animal-like reactivity towards something is almost like your system kind of just hijacking you and controlling you rather than you living consciously. It's your system trying to prevent you from feeling some kind of pain that exists inside of you in a way that simply kind of bypasses the experience. Maybe anger covers up that pain. Maybe like these knee-jerk reactions start to divert your attention away from pain that exists inside of you. And I want you to start to recognize how this is highly unsustainable in your life. And reactivity is going to happen for the rest of your life. This is just how it is to be a human. But we can drastically reduce it. We can really actually change quite deeply how much we get reactive and what happens when we do actually get reactive. How fast can we catch it? How fast can we notice these sort of underlying dynamics that are actually controlling us? Can we heal some of this stuff? This is very alterable. We can most definitely kind of dive into this stuff and start to change it. But when we're just kind of unconscious and we just don't care about this kind of work, this is actually highly unsustainable. We as human beings cannot actually live a fulfilling life and just act like animals simultaneously. A fulfilling life is synonymous with a conscious life, living in the present, being grounded, being attuned to experience. This is a must for living a high quality and fulfilling life where you actually reach your full potential. So what kind of life do you really want to live? One where you're always kind of stuck in reactivity, like subtly panicking, always kind of tense, maybe even just like very overtly panicking as well. Or one where you're just more attuned to experience, one where you're not easily thrown off by a sensation in your body, by someone saying something. One where you can actually remain grounded in yourself in the midst of a chaotic experience or in the midst of a difficult emotion. You can actually remain grounded and connected in that experience. Of course, the second option sounds far more valuable than the first. No one wants to pick the first, and reactivity is a way to actually just avoid things that are occurring. The second is a way to address things head on and to not always be avoiding life, to learn how to settle into life regardless of the experience, increasing your capacity to embrace the full spectrum that is life, the high highs and the low lows, not numbing yourself to any of the spectrums. So I want to talk about what's kind of happening beneath the surface when we're getting reactive. So reactivity is often driven by our limbic system. So it puts us into fight, flight, freeze, and it's designed to protect us from perceived threats. That's one point of view. Another one is subconscious conditioning. So early experiences shape patterns of reactivity, maybe childhood programming, right? Triggers that link back to unmet needs can kind of get you to lash out essentially out of fear or just some form of discomfort. Another one is just cultural and social conditioning, which can just amplify specific emotional reactions. Emotional charge and unprocessed pain. So reactivity often points to unresolved emotions that are stored in the body. So reacting with anger may mask deeper feelings like hurt or fear or sadness or grief or shame. Another one is just simply the ego and threats to your identity. Like when beliefs, opinions, or your self-image are actually challenged, the ego reacts to protect its narrative, to protect its sense of self. When your psychological self is actually threatened in some kind of way, you will have a physiological survival response. For example, if you walk up to, let's say, like a fundamentalist Christian, and you start like questioning his beliefs, it's a very threatening experience to his psyche because he's very identified with these beliefs. These beliefs are literally his sense of self. Like, this is what he totally identifies with. This is what his sense of reality is. So when this starts to get questioned, his sense of reality is being questioned, his sense of self is being questioned, and the mind is a homeostatic system. And it likes to kind of prevent change. It likes to be quite conservative. And to be more open is something that requires actual psychological work, psychological, spiritual work and development. It's actually harder to be very open-minded than it is to just be closed-minded and defensive. It's easier to just be defensive and reactive and act like an animal. This is more like the default state when we're unconscious, and to actually raise your consciousness and be open and be compassionate and be aware, present. This is something that requires some mastery. So the ego will actually just try and maintain itself, sometimes even at all costs, depending on how deeply you are in it. So why does this reactivity persist? Ultimately, it's a lack of awareness and this continuous reinforcement of what is going on. So many people are just simply unaware of what's going on here. And you can understand what I'm saying in a very conceptual way, but when it comes to the actual experience, you don't really know how to remain present. You don't really know how to actually be aware. You can understand what I'm saying here at the level of just strictly thought and concept and all this stuff, but there's a difference between knowing it through that and knowing it through experience, knowing it through just learning to watch reality without reacting to it, without judging it, without needing to change it. Typically, you learn this through a meditation practice where you're able to just, let's say, watch your thoughts without judging them, or watch a feeling without judging them, allowing it to just move as it naturally wants to. And the reinforcement component, so reactivity often gets short-term results reinforcing the behavior. So shutting down ends an argument, but doesn't solve the underlying issue. So we can actually begin to see that in the very short term, being reactive maybe bypasses pain or gets you some kind of result that you can kind of convince yourself you want, but deep down you don't actually really want it. It gets you some kind of result that temporarily bypasses something. This is typically what happens. And it just keeps you stuck in that pattern, right? You just keep building it over and over and over again. Another good point is that how our modern lifestyles actually just simply overwhelm the nervous system, making reactivity more frequent. We're always on our phones, we're always eating junk food. A lot of our modern culture is very sickening, far more sickening than any of us actually believe. And you need to actually have strong boundaries with a lot of the things in, your environment that actually create sickness, like toxic workplace environments, people who maybe aren't interested in their own well-being whatsoever. The food that you eat is full of toxins and heavy metals. Certain environments are full of toxins and heavy metals, very polluted. Being on your phone all the time, mindlessly scrolling, always being on the internet addiction, video game addiction, porn addiction. There's all sorts of things that are kind of just designed to manipulate you and then get you to just react to life. You just react unconsciously, and then it starts to just perpetuate itself. It keeps you in this sort of low vibe, low consciousness, low emotional state. And it's quite difficult to break out of when you aren't aware of any of this kind of stuff, when you don't really have a vision for your life, when you don't meditate, when you don't have anyone to help you as well. It's easy to kind of just remain stuck because it's scary to change. We don't know what's on the other side of that change, or at least we think we don't. Who knows? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. So I want to talk about moving beyond reactivity now. The core element here is simply self-awareness. It's the capacity to just watch yourself without judgment or without further reactivity. To just watch what's going on, and that's it. Take out your hand. Just look at your hand. Don't label it hand. Just watching it. just looking at it. Now do that with your own thoughts. Do that with your own feelings, just watching feelings, just applying awareness on them directly. And this actually begins to shift your internal experience. This is how you actually build that self-awareness muscle. Your awareness alone is curative as well. Your awareness alone is a healing phenomenon. Your awareness alone, when you apply it to your reactivity, when you apply it to your cycles that keep you trapped in suffering, they slowly over time, at a rate that your system can handle it, begin to change things and heal things. Because there's a certain speed at which you can progress. And when you just exceed it, when it goes too far or when it goes too fast, you can't really handle it. Your system can only handle so much at once. So if the change is too much, too fast, it actually overwhelms you. It kind of has this sort of backfiring effect. So just gently applying awareness kind of begins to shift you at a rate that's comfortable for your system. Sometimes it can definitely be uncomfortable. You can experience an emotion like sadness or grief or guilt. But there's always this ability to really just, I want to use the word handle what's thrown at you, but I don't really like it. To just remain in contact with what is happening. This ability to just remain in contact with what is going on inside of you actually just shifts what is going on. Even when you don't think there's any change happening, there is. A lot of changes are happening at levels that are subconscious and completely unconscious, at levels that you aren't really seeing. So another core point is nervous system regulation. And before I even get into this point, I also want to just give you some ideas on how to cultivate self-awareness. So just going back to my last point briefly, things like journaling, meditation, writing down your triggers, writing down the areas where you go unconscious in life, writing down the situations where you go unconscious in life. Map out your psyche, map out your internal world, get clear about your own psyche. No one has ever told you to do this probably ever in your life, to get clear about your own psyche, get clear about what's going on inside of you. I'm probably the first. I'd really recommend doing that. Get clear about exactly why you get triggered in relationships, when, why, what's going on here, what I'm feeling. Is this feeling of maybe anger masking a feeling of sadness? Right? Writing it down, meditating every day, learning to just feel what's going on, learning to just watch what's happening, learning to just have structured time dedicated, fully dedicated to yourself, just applying awareness to your system so that it can actually just unburden and that you can regulate your nervous system, which is my second point. Nervous system regulation practices like deep breathing, meditation, or grounding techniques can calm the body, and a regulated nervous system creates space for intentional responses, less reactivity, pulling you out of survival mode and allowing you to process a lot of the baggage that you actually just hold on to as a human being. Reframing triggers as teachers is also really important. So rather than viewing your triggers as like this horrible bad thing that you're a horrible human being for having, reframe it as just a lesson, a learning opportunity. So triggers just reveal unprocessed emotions and areas for growth. So instead of just hating it, just inquire, why did I feel this way? Learn to approach it with compassion and curiosity. Learning to just approach your triggers with a sense of openness, like, yeah, why did I get triggered? And just honesty as well, a willingness to kind of look into it. It can be difficult, which is why I emphasize on just learning to just be compassionate towards yourself, learning to just be gentle with yourself with this kind of work. And the last point right now is just practice, especially practicing something like mindful responses. So just learning to watch your reactivity in the moment, be able to call it out when you're being reactive, right? In the midst of your reactivity, I'm being reactive. Call yourself out. And then you're actually practicing a more mindful response. So instead of normalizing reactivity and lashing out, like a lot of places have, you're kind of just letting that one go, letting go of normalizing it, and instead just calling it out when it happens, right? Just admitting it to yourself, taking a breather if you have to, and then just doing your best to work from a more responsive place rather than a more reactive place. So this begins to interrupt the habitual cycle. Right in the midst of that experience, you catch it and you start to break that reinforcement. So I want you to actually just reflect on moments of reactivity in your life. What actually is it that triggers you? Is it the actual situation, or is it something inside of you? What's really going on here? Is the situation actually just like this horrible situation where like life is, we're all screwed, we're all gonna die? Or is it something very different from that? Is it something inside of you that is almost like screaming to just be looked at? Something inside of you trying to come into awareness that has been pushed down so much. And then simply by allowing that to come into awareness, that part of you can naturally begin to heal over time, and then it returns to that natural open state so that those emotions and those thoughts can just kind of process and release themselves, and that part of you returns to its sort of natural open state. You let go of those burdens, and that part of you that was once burdened is now unburdened. So reactivity isn't a flaw, it's simply a sign to deepen your awareness of something, which leads to genuine growth, very deep growth. That's it for this video. If you're interested in working with me one-to-one, you can apply to do so. Link is in the pinned comment. Take it easy.